Okay. All right, it's 12:04, so I'm gonna start. So hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. It's our pleasure to have Hasu with us. And Hasu has a lot of titles. I'm not even gonna try to do a quick intro for him. So Hasu, can you just give us a quick intro of yourself and what got you into crypto?
Sure. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Hasu, or actually now I'm pronouncing it like you. Actually, we would say it's Hasu.
Hasu.
So yeah, I'm a research collaborator at Paradigm. So I'm not part of the investment team. It's more like sort of a satellite function. We do sort of invest together and research stuff together and write like a lot of content together. I co-host the Uncommon Core podcast with Suzu. I'm chief editor at Deribit Insights, and I just do like a lot of research on my own and angel investing in the space. So I wear a lot of hats and basically always do what I want. What got me into crypto? Good question. So I used to play online poker for 10 years, and a lot of my friends got into Bitcoin because it was very useful to them to send money around the world between different poker sites and between different jurisdictions. They always urged me to get into crypto. I wouldn't for the longest time because I was still very focused on online poker. But when that was coming to an end, then I was looking for a new opportunity, and crypto seemed really intellectually interesting. Yeah, and then basically 2018 is when I made the jump from poker to crypto, and like in no time fell down the rabbit hole and got completely sucked into this. And now I'm basically dedicating my entire life to it, and I feel like I could keep doing this for at least like the next decade or so.
Yeah, I think a lot of poker players fall in love with crypto as well. I think we can see that from Dragonflies, Hasib. Yeah, so I think that's very, very interesting background. And you talk about, you write a lot, you write for Deribit and also write for a few other organizations. Recently, you wrote an amazing piece on DAO treasury management. And before we dive deep into, which is the topic today, let's first take a step back and, look at some bigger picture and also talk about some, background information. So could you explain to the audience, what is treasury in the real world and, why does it exist and what's its function?
Sure. So every company has a treasury, and I'd say the purpose of a treasury is just to manage sort of the cash and whatever liquidity demands a company might have. So basically match its assets with its liabilities. And in the bigger sense, you could also say, the goal of the treasury is to budget any kind of expenses and maximize shareholder value. If we are talking about, for some things, I would say we also cannot talk about managing risk, right? So if you're a bank and you have a balance sheet, or you're a fund or anything that has any kind of market related risk, then the treasury would also be in charge of managing that risk and making sure that whatever liabilities come your way, that you can match them and not go out of business.
Yes, definitely. So I think that's a great general overview of what treasury is. And we know everything in crypto sometimes is could be very different from the real world. So how is treasury in the the DAO world, or the crypto world, different from the real world?
I would say, first of all, there isn't really a concept of a treasury in crypto the way that you would think about it in traditional finance. And so in traditional finance, we said, so you have treasury is like a huge part of every company, right? It's where all of the budgeting decisions are made for the next business year, where you make sure that you reach your business goals, where you look into, how you can, what you want to spend, but also how you can get it, right? Do you issue more stock, or do you take on debt? Or if you have too much cash, actually, then you can return money to your investors. But mostly it's just, you always want to make sure to have like a clear picture of money that you have to spend in the next business year. And if you look at DAOs, then like nominally speaking, they have something they call treasuries, but I think something we showed in our piece is when you actually look into those treasuries, there's nothing in them, right? It's just projects have sort of their native token in there. And then you have sites like openorgs.info, and they put sort of a market value on those treasuries, even though it only has the native tokens. And it says, oh, so Uniswap has like a $15 billion treasury. But what we try to show is that if you look at it like the treasury of a traditional company, then you would not actually count the native token as a treasury asset at all. So because if we look at sort of how we account for those things in a traditional company, then you have sort of you have what we call the float, which is sort of all shares of a company that are trading on the market, and the restricted shares, which is all shares that are promised to investors or promised to employees and that are still vesting. And together they make out sort of all outstanding shares. And outstanding shares are a subset of all authorized shares. And authorized shares are basically all shares that can exist for a company. It's almost like you would imagine like a hard or a soft cap or in a token contract. And tokens that are sitting in the treasury is what we would typically call it's shares that have been authorized by the board of directors, but they have not been issued to the market. And yeah, in traditional company, we would simply not account those as assets. But in the DAO treasury, somehow we got into a situation where these DAOs count them as assets, and I think it leads to them completely overestimating the degree to which they are capitalized and to which they are sort of prepared for different market risks and protocol risks that they might face in the future.
I like all the parallelism you brought between the treasuries in the real world and the treasury for DAOs, especially for involving these native tokens. So I think we can all agree that there's something we could be done about DAO treasury. So what are some mainstream ways you're seeing how different DAOs are handling right now? And out of these mainstream ways, which one do you like the most?
Well, I would say that the most common way would be not to manage it at all, right? I can not really point you to any DAO treasury that is really managed in any way you would call it treasury management in the real world. So we are seeing. So I think to also praise, I think projects that have actual stable coins in their treasury, like Maker, Compound, Aave, Yearn. I think that's probably like the best thing to point out, that like a treasury should consist of real stable assets, so you can make sure that you can pay whatever liabilities you might have in the future, that are not dependent on any the market at a given time. But apart from that, there's not really anything that I would praise with the way that treasuries are run right now. And I think that's sort of the problem that we try to solve. I think when you look at the different treasuries, then to me it seems like it's not because people don't want to do better, it's because they lack sort of any kind of framework for how to think about these things. And that's why I think sometimes it's good to, we all want to tell ourselves that we are sort of reinventing, the wheel in crypto, and we are finding completely new ways for humans to work together and so on. But ultimately, I think a lot of these problems have already been solved in traditional companies. And I think sometimes it pays just to, look at what others are already doing, right? And that's why we try to give some simple goals or some simple rules for how you ought to think about your treasury. I think the biggest one is probably that the goal of the treasury is to maximize the token holder value, and that's sort of the overarching principle of any decision that the treasury ought to make. And derived from that is sort of that token holder value is maximized when you allocate each dollar at its highest opportunity, its highest yielding opportunity, right? And so this includes, actually thinking through what is your budget, what cash flows, what cash flows do you have? Also, what liabilities do you have, and what risks do you face in the future? And then again, from that sort of, you can think about, when I'm actually looking at each dollar that I get, both from revenue, but also money that I can get from issuing more tokens or from taking on debt. Like, what do I do with that money, right? Because right now, everyone is sort of just, almost mindlessly, they get revenue, they buy back the token and burn it. And this is crazy to me, right? It's like you have companies that are extremely fast growing, that have huge margins, and they're just, instead of reinvesting the money into growth, they are paying it to investors when it would have a much higher yield reinvesting it into the protocol or putting it into the treasury that are empty. And so I think that to me is sort of the biggest thing that's going wrong right now, in the way that people think about treasuries.
I think that's also my feeling when I was reading your piece. And I think I just want to follow up on the last part. I think you touched on something very important, which is, the value alignment between the token holders and the protocol itself, right? The treasury should help increase the token value in the long term. But I think a lot of people in crypto, especially the token holders, might thinking a different time horizon than the protocol itself. So, how do you think about the relationship with the community when thinking about, using the treasury to maximize token holder value?
That's a great question. I will take a very controversial stance here. I think community involvement is generally extremely overvalued. I think that flat hierarchies to me just don't make any sense. I think you won't run a successful company if you try to manage it like using a flat hierarchy, if you ask for everyone's opinion, if you ask for the market's opinion, especially because the market is extremely short term and makes very bad decisions. So I think sort of the sweet spot for what we can do in crypto is sort of, you can have very lean development teams, with strong hierarchies, but you can make completely trustless protocols. And then you don't have to trust the team. And then it's okay when the team is sort of itself very centralized. But I don't really believe in, decentralized communities coming up with, novel protocols and just being able to compete with, more centrally managed organizations.
Yeah, I think I just want to follow up on that as well. You talk about, the flat versus lean kind of structure for DAOs. So what are some like DAO structure that can, enable better management of treasury? And, what are some new ways you're seeing that you're excited about? Or is there anything that you're excited about or like other people haven't really, explored enough in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at this point we have to sort of address the elephant in the room, right? Which is that some people require governance, some projects require governance, right? So you can have something like Uniswap, and yeah, it has like a fee switch, and it has like a switch for like what is sort of the distribution between like the protocol and the IPs or something. But this is all like very minor stuff. But apart from that, the protocol can be completely trustless. And it does not have a sort of any component of governance voting. But if you look at Maker, you cannot have a similar system that you have in Uniswap, where there's no governance necessary, right? Because if you have sort of a stable coin that is generated from different types of collateral, then you need someone to evaluate what collateral we can add or which collateral we have to remove and how that collateral is valued and what interest rates we want to charge on that collateral at a given time. And so you're always going to have some amount of governance that is required. And so you cannot completely abstract it away. And then I think it's very natural to say, so if for protocols that can be completely trustless, maybe it's fine if the team is run in a very centralized, lean way. But what about those projects that do need some governance because they just don't work without it? And I think in that case, there is I think there are quite a few models that would work better than the status quo, right? I would say almost the status quo is like we have very flat organizations, and maybe someone from the community makes a proposal to the something related to the treasury, like, hey guys, let's like diversify our treasury or something. Like, I mean, even them saying diversify is is kind of misleading, because there's nothing in it right now that you can diversify. But basically you depend on sort of the community to make any decisions, and then for token holders to sign off on it without really having like a long-term view on it, or really like understanding the needs. And so I think what we need is we need to sort of find a way that we can have token holder voting. But let me say it a different way. So the other problem, and so I'm quoting from like a company that, or like a protocol that I talked to a couple of days ago. So this is someone who I invested in, and they are a project that is sort of looking to launch like the next year. And they said, hey, Hasu, we agree like wholeheartedly with your article. You should always think about, maximizing token holder value. And we don't really want to, give away these tokens. We don't think it makes much sense. But here's the thing. Our lawyers told us that we have to decentralize our coin distribution as soon as possible to remove our legal risk and our legal liabilities that we have. And so this is something, that's not immediately obvious, but that definitely informs, the decisions that projects make. So this is a project that needs some amount of governance. They cannot really abstract it away, even though they would like to, but it's just not possible with the product that they are going for. And so they are saying, oh, so we need some governance. And our lawyers are telling us if we have governance, then we have to decentralize sort of our token holder base right away. And sort of the status quo with that is, oh, then you just, do yield farming, you give away 50% of your tokens, and then already on paper, like you're decentralized. But the result is that you have like extremely apathetic governance, and, nobody makes any proposals, nobody votes on anything. And it's just overall like very bad decision-making that does not really benefit the long-term health of the protocol. And so I think, like, to give one example, I think one way to do it better is sort of the way, or at least similar to the way that MakerDAO does it. So I used to think Maker was, highly bureaucratic and not really well run, but in the last half year, I've sort of changed my mind on it quite a bit. To briefly explain how it works, so Maker has almost like a hub and spoke model. So it has a hub in the middle, and the hub is controlled by token holders. And then around the hub, you have all of those different, what they call core units. And each core unit is basically like a working group. For example, there's one that's called protocol development. And then there's one that's called risk assessment. And there's one that's called growth and marketing. And there's one that's called real world assets, and so on and so on. And these core units, they are almost run like centralized companies. They have a manager, they call it core unit facilitator. And every year they apply to the hub, and they make a proposal. They say what they want to do, and they apply for a budget. And then the hub basically votes on allocating a budget to that working group. And to me, this seems like an approach that would capture the best of both worlds, right? So you can have a base of token holders that's very, very widely distributed, but the individual decisions and proposals are still made by very like centralized sort of working groups that are run like you would run a traditional company. And then you can probably have the best of both worlds. I think that's something that I would probably try to pursue if I were launching or running a protocol today.
I see. So the hub is controlled by the community, but there's individual working groups responsible for different tasks, and they have to apply to the hub. Is that a good summary of a potential way for different DAOs to looking at treasury management, or just DAO management in general?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I think like the key concept, I think, is ownership, right? I think what you lack with DAOs and flagged hierarchies in general is ownership, right? someone is responsible for thing A, and if thing A doesn't get done, then you're fired. So I think, that kind of incentive is really important. And so you have to give ownership. If you want things to get done, you have to give ownership to someone and, make them and hold them, accountable for it. And the other thing that I would say is sort of when you have this hub and spoke model, then it turns out, so the thing that's actually in the middle, the hub, is actually the same as the treasury, because the hub or the treasury is the one that is making all budgeting decisions and ensures that we know exactly what our liabilities are, what working groups we want to have based on what products we want to have, and how much money they need in the next year, and how can we get that money? How can we ensure that, if the bear market comes, we can still, make all of the payments that we want to make. We can do the yield farming that we want to do, and so on, right? And so I think the insight here is that it's actually the treasury is sort of the most central part to every DAO. And I think this always has to be like run in a, very tightly controlled way, like with great foresight. But then you can have like a more decentralized structure with different working groups around that.
Very, very true. So it sounds more and more to me that DAO treasury management is less about, tools managing treasury, but more about, having the structure to enable better, coordination within the DAO.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and that's why I think like all of the current approaches to treasury management are completely misguided, right? You have right now, we see like product after product launching offer different quote unquote treasury management solutions, like, call selling on treasury tokens, or, some kind of diversified portfolio management that has like stable coins and BTC and ETH and DeFi and whatnot. But I think it's just a completely wrong approach. This is not something that you want to outsource. I think we have to get to a point where we think of, the treasury management is like the most essential part of the DAO itself. It's where you make all of the budgeting decisions and, plan for the future. This is not something that you can outsource. And it's a lot more than just, making sure you have some stable coins in the DAO.
Okay, I think that's a great end on my part. So now there's two ways I'm gonna do the second part of this. So you can raise your hand. I'm gonna just ask you to unmute and you can ask your question. And also you can post questions in chat. And before we pass out a form to everyone to submit their questions, so I also want to respect, people who actually submitted their questions, and I'll ask their questions first. So the first question is a DeFi general kind of question, not specifically related to DAO treasury, but I think it's quite interesting. So the question is, blockchain is getting more and more complicated. Example is, how you combine different DeFi Lego combinations and produce different things. The decentralization nature of on-chain entities make it hard to revert mistakes, and also it's hard to protect the average user or hold anyone accountable. And how do you think this problem, if it's unsolved, it's going to hurt the adaptation in the long term, or is it a trade-off that we have to make?
Okay. I wonder if it even is a problem. I mean, so if things become more and more complicated, then I think, my instinct would be that people put less and less trust into, the more like unaudited and more risky stuff. And, more and more users go to sort of the brands that they know they can trust. One, because they have been around for a long time, their contracts and their governance have a certain amount of Lindy. And then second, they have sort of proven that, they are well capitalized. They have a large treasury. They are well insured and so on. So if something goes wrong, then they can make users whole, right? I think we have seen so far in DeFi that, yes, in theory, protocols are not legally bound to make their investors whole if they have a bug in a smart contract, for example, or an oracle gets exploited or something like that, right? But in practice, I think we've seen that in almost all of these cases, the protocols do try to make the user whole. Why? Because your brand and the trust that users have in you is one of the biggest moats that you can have in a space where almost everything can be forked, right? The only thing that they cannot fork is your brand. And so you want to do whatever you can to protect that brand. So yeah, I think in that sense, I think we can expect that brands will become extremely important, and protocols will do a lot to protect their brand. And I think even without legal recourse, you can hence expect to, if there's a bug, that you will probably be made whole as a user.
Next question is from chat from Hasu. Do you want to unmute yourself to ask that, or I can ask it for you? Just raise your hand. Okay, so I'll ask it for him. So do you think the accounting principle from traditional finance can suffice to design treasury management for DAOs, or do we need to think of a modified framework? I'll add on that. If we need to modify it, what are some aspects you think we need to modify?
Yeah. So I think sort of the elephant in the room once again is, can you apply it, without attracting regulators and saying, hey, this is a centralized company. This is run like a centralized company. This looks like a centralized company. So we're going to regulate it like a centralized company. And, it's token as a security. And so I think it definitely makes sense to, think how we can get most of the benefits, but also making sure that, you comply with, what I would call like the spirit of the law, right? So we have sort of security laws for a reason. We have investor protection laws for a reason, right? They want to protect, certain bad things from happening. This ensures the stability of capital markets, and that's overall really important, right? So I think even if we argue that, these DeFi tokens and they are not securities, then I think you can still go a long way to make sure that, you sort of give regulators absolutely zero reason to want to regulate you, because you already comply with the spirit of the law, even if you don't comply with the law itself. So I think we definitely want to think about, how can we like credibly say, for example, well, we don't have any liabilities. So if we do not take the funds of our customers, we are actually non-custodial. I think that's really important. Or if we have governance, we are not the ones that make any unilateral decisions, right? So I think it's definitely important, if you have coin voting, that the company is not the only one who makes these decisions. But I think we have to be careful also not to go in the other direction, right? Where you have like very widely distributed token, and you have a protocol that depends very heavily on coin voting, but then people just don't vote, right? And then a few people can just dominate everything. I think that's also not great. So I think you probably want to do like a middle ground where you have delegation. There's a good incentive to delegate for people, and delegates get paid executive salary, but they are like jurisdictionally, geographically, in any other sense, well decentralized and diverse. And then I think you probably covered that base well. And then at that point, it's just, is there anything like you don't want to copy? I think overall, there's a lot to learn from looking at traditional corporate finance principles here. I think there's a lot more that you can copy and that would apply well than things that don't apply.
Okay, I think on the delegation side, can you talk more about delegation frameworks? So for example, do you have any information about maybe Gitcoin or ENS are handling it? I think one interesting thing is that when I claim my ENS or my Gitcoin, is I have to delegate it when I claim it. Or I think it's suggested, very highly suggested, built into the UX. Do you think that could play a role in it, and how could it affect the treasury management process?
Yeah, I think the way that ENS did it is, I don't know much about it. So the only thing I saw when I claimed my ENS also is that you had to delegate to someone, right? You could click on anyone. I think it doesn't make a difference, but at least they nudge you, right? That's what they call it, right? When they make one option like easier than another option. So they didn't order the people by like the delegates that they would propose to you. The ones they put on top were not the ones that had the most amount of tokens, but they were, I'm not really sure what they did, but they tried to do it in a way that sort of balanced out the funds. So if someone had a lot of tokens delegate already, then they would not appear in like the top 10 of the proposed things. So I think that the fact that you have to delegate it to someone is probably a good thing. I like that. And otherwise, I think the most important thing to me is probably you want to make sure that your delegates get paid, right? So a good example of that, MakerDAO. Maker is sort of the most mature governance, I would say, of any DeFi project. But they used to have a lot of problems sort of with voter apathy and, one way dominating everything, because, these problems make each other worse, right? So people don't vote because there's no incentive to vote, and it's very hard to stay on top of all the things that are happening. But then even those who want to vote, it's expensive, you have to pay gas, but then you may vote no on something, and then there's one whale who votes yes, and your vote is moot, right? So it's kind of demotivating, right? And so Maker is also one of the first to pioneer, the concept of delegation. So making it very easy for people to delegate their votes. And this was sort of 3 months ago, right? And that's when they started their delegation system. But I would say they made one mistake why it didn't really take off. They had some promising delegates, but most of them now left already. It's because they did not have a salary for the delegates, right? So having a lot of tokens under your command and having this responsibility of voting in the best interest of the DAO, understanding all of the proposals, everything that's going on, and making good business decisions, that's actually what we ask of them, right? I think to me, this demands like an executive salary, but Maker didn't want to pay the delegates anything. They said, oh, well, once you're approved, just make your own proposal, like get the DAO to pay you what you think you're worth. And I mean, that way you're just not going to attract very good people. People don't want to haggle with a DAO for their salary. So I think stuff like this has to be like almost written into the corporate code of the DAO. So I think delegation to me is the future of governance. I think like getting a lot of people to vote on stuff just doesn't work. Most people are not motivated to work, motivated to look at all the things and then vote. It's like direct democracy. It just works only for stuff that do people really care about. But most of the things are not. I think this whole concept of there's too much socialism, I would almost say, like in crypto. I don't know where these ideas come from, that everyone has to be like a co-owner of everything, right? Everything you use, you're a co-owner of. Oh, like you're co-governing it. No, this doesn't make any sense. Like, let the people who understand it run it and write protocols that you can use without trusting the people behind it. I think to me, that's sort of the sweet spot. And I think the way that we get that is sort of with delegation. So you have people who, just like in a democracy, you can vote for them, you can give them your vote, and they will vote, in different things, some in your favor, some maybe not. But I think ultimately it will lead to much better decisions than what we have right now.
Perfect. Bridget, you have a question. I'll ask you to unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks so much for coming today. My question is more about your research writing process, like in general. I'm in the process of developing some research myself, and I published one piece. And in developing that research, I analyzed a lot of your research and really admire it a lot. And my question is, how did you develop your kind of distinct research, like style and brand in this space? Your research is like super technical and visual and clear. And so how did you kind of go about developing that? And then also, how do you primarily like obtain knowledge for your research, given that research in the space is super scarce?
Wow, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. So your first question was, how did I develop my style, right? And the second one was, how do I acquire like the necessary info? I think, right? Yeah.
Let me ask her to unmute again.
All right, I couldn't unmute. Yeah, this one was just like acquiring information on like what you're developing your piece.
Yeah. So I think on the first, it's a good question. I think the style, I think I would say it just comes naturally over time. Like you read stuff and you just see, if you consume a lot of research by other people, then I think you get the sense of what works for you and what doesn't, right? And I think over time, you notice to there's sort of a pattern, how other people make things click for you, and then you learn how can you make make things click for other people. And for me, I always try to sort of focus on writing for one person, right? I mean, that's sort of very cliche way of writing advice, but for me it works. I try to imagine like almost like writing for myself. Like all of this stuff is actually me thinking about, okay, so what was I like 4 weeks ago when I researched something? Like I'm at point A, and then I want to get to point B. I want to understand something. And then for me, sort of almost every time the stuff that I write down is stuff that I didn't know like 4 weeks ago, I would say. And so it's very easy usually because I mean, I'm writing for myself 4 weeks ago, and writing what I would like to have known. And I think when you do it like that, I think it's very easy, to cover all your bases and have a good structure, because you still have like it very present in your mind, the things that you didn't know and the things that clicked for you in studying, right? So I think that ties into sort of the second point. How do you acquire info? I mean, that's a very good question. I would say nowadays, I'm in a very comfortable position that I have a big network of people. I think a network is like the most underrated aspect of researching. So if you have a name, if you're someone in crypto, who people talk to, I think having a brand is like the best thing about it is that you can just cold call anyone and ask them stupid questions, and they're going to take the time and explain it to you. And I would say almost none of the like more technical stuff that I write, because I'm not technical. Like I cannot write any code myself. A lot of the technical stuff is actually just me sending like tons of questions to people who are technical. And so I think I mean, sort of the biggest thing is you don't have to be afraid to ask people very stupid questions, and build enough goodwill with them and build enough brand in the space and credit that the people actually take the time to answer it. And fortunately, in my experience in the space, people are very just very helpful in every possible way. So I always try to also give back in that sense. I always have like, I respond to almost every email. I always have like open Twitter DMs. When someone asks me something, then I always try to respond, just because other people have helped me so much in the past. I mean, so network is one. I mean, just don't be afraid like to dig for like just the sources yourself, right? A lot of the info, almost all of the info that you can possibly want about like DeFi is buried in some kind of governance forum, in some kind of proposal. I mean, there's usually like millions of lines of text, but you can just search for different keywords in the forums. You can also use Twitter. I mean, there are a lot of good tools to use Twitter effectively, and to look for tweets from certain people and so on. Same for blog posts. I think over time, I think you can develop like quite a good resource for that. Oh, and then sort of the biggest one, and the last, and for me, probably the biggest one is I have sort of a big library just of stuff. So for me, like writing down, like learning something for me is almost like the same as writing it down. So if I learn something, then I'm going to write it down. I need some way to organize the information for myself so I can like retain it. And when I learn about a new topic, even if it's just like, okay, so that a new like DeFi protocol came out the other day. I don't really know what it does. So just, go on the homepage, read around, like open it on testnet or whatever, try some things. And whatever I did there, I just write it down. Like even if it was total garbage, I just still write it down. I'd write like my impression and what it does. And then I have like another document where I might link to this document, right? Or I have a diary where I write things down. So I think almost like I call it my second brain. It's almost like I have like, I don't know, 5,000 Google documents or whatever. And they all link to each other because that's how I organize my information.
All right, I'll follow up on that question. I think somebody asked me in chat. There's so many topics. How do you choose which one to write about?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, nowadays, I would say it's almost always it has like a multi-purpose, right? I think always in business, like in anything you do, you want to do something that's, good for yourself and good for others. And so when I read, so one of my favorite topics, for example, is, yeah, I wrote a lot about like trading on decentralized exchanges, how you can trade without, how can you understand like the price impact of your trade? How can you trade without getting front run and so on? And for me, this is just really interesting in a like a variety of ways, right? For one, like we know, like empirically, like probably like $300 million this year are going to be lost due to sandwich attacks, right? And this is only because people don't know how to like parameterize their trades correctly on decentralized exchanges, and because the decentralized exchanges are not doing a very good job of protecting their users. And so I think, okay, so if I write this post, maybe I can save like 1,000 people from getting sandwiched or something. And this is just something where I think, education goes a long way. So it definitely has like this kind of social component, but it's also really like intellectually interesting to me to understand how decentralized exchanges work. When I understand that, maybe I can be better at finding actually what is sort of the best framework for building a decentralized exchange. So I might go and invest in it. And that's what I did, for example, with CowSwap. So when that came around, I already had thought for months about, so what is the best framework for trading on decentralized exchanges. And I thought, oh, well, this might actually be the winning formula. And so I went and invested in it. And so I always try to, when I do something, I try to think of, okay, so how can this pay off? And the more ways that it can pay off, I think the more likely I am to do it.
I see. And how do you organize this 5,000 pages? The second brain sounds like have you heard of Rome research?
No.
Oh, that's a marketing line they use a lot. It's like very similar to, yeah, I'm not going to get into that, but like, how do you manage all those different files? I mean, 5,000 is a little bit hard to keep track.
Yeah, do send it to me though after the call.
Okay, yeah, I will.
Yeah, so I write a diary. That's one way. So definitely every day, like after work, I write down. So all of the documents that I created that day, I like link to them and like in a couple of words describe what I did that day. It's not long. It's just that like I write down like what happened in Paradigm, write down what happened in like Flashboards, what happened in Maker, on Twitter, like with my investments, just like a couple of words each time. And to me, it really helps. Like when I commit something to memory, I already know like, okay, it's going to be much easier to retain it next time. And I also know like, this is where I put it, right? So I think it's very important, that things have their place. But then I also like, aside, I would say sort of from this like diary, I have one page for like, let's say I have one page for Maker, right? And then going out from that, there would be one on, the people who work there. And then there would be one on monetary policy and one on liquidation systems and one on, other stablecoins and whatnot. So it's like always sort of cross-linking stuff, right? So, and from the stablecoin page, there would be a link to Maker, and from Maker, there's a link to the stablecoin page. And so you can just, click forever basically. And it depends, sometimes I only make like for some of the most high level stuff, I don't even have it because it's just implied, I don't need to make I don't need to make a sheet for, what categories of DeFi apps exist, because, that's just a given for me. But for some other stuff where it's mostly when I'm still working through something myself. So I might think, okay, so what are all the different ways to protect the user from getting sandwiched on a decentralized exchange? Like what are all the ways that we can settle a trade? That's when I make a new document. And then I sort of slowly work through all of the different approaches. And like, first I fill the documents with all the kind of information that I have. And then I slowly organize it. And while organizing, it almost feels like it's like another cliche comparison, but it's almost like sculpturing. So you have like a block of stone, but then you only start taking like away from it. And what's left is sort of your organized thought process.
Awesome. I'll keep asking the questions I organized before. Yeah, second, Rome research. Yeah, I think the way you said how you do in research, I think you're gonna love Rome. Another question I got is, what are some key metrics when you're doing? You said you're an angel investor as well. So what are some key metrics when you look at in the due diligence process of a deal, especially given you also talked about you cannot really just look into the code. So how do you do that process?
Well, I mean, in some cases, I really understand the fundamentals of the market, like decentralized exchange trading or an MEV. I would say in those cases, I mean, in those cases, I would say it's kind of obvious to me, but I also have to say, so if you're just an angel investor, I think you probably shouldn't have the illusion that you can like really understand most deals that you're given to, or can really sort of evaluate the founders behind it. I think what's better is, having people that you can trust, right? So in my case, sometimes I get deals from Paradigm, sometimes get deals from other sources, and some deals are like offered to me directly. But I think it's more important that if you're like a standalone investor, you have to admit that you do not have the resources. Don't spread yourself too thin, focus on what you're good at. And then just trust, the professional firms who do have all the resources to do that and evaluate that, who have a lot more experience than you at venture. Just trust their gut and trust their assessment of the founders and of the business, and just go along with it. I think that's probably actually more useful advice. So if you're an individual, then try to get into a situation where you can co-invest and not have to do all of the evaluation yourself, because like realistically, you're not going to make good decisions, and it's not going to be a very effective use of your time.
I see. Now, next question is, what's your biggest pet peeve with the blockchain ecosystem right now?
Oh man, there's so many.
Let's do three. Let's do three, not the biggest.
I mean, a lot of the space just looks like a scam. I think that's a given, right? I mean, there's so many. So I think the biggest product market fit of crypto at this point I would say is gambling. I mean, that's realistically, it's the only thing of crypto, the only part of crypto that has really hit product market fit. Like just more and more Ponzi's, more and more like lottery kind of games, and including like most of the smaller projects, right? They have no fundamentals, like the smaller cryptocurrencies they have no fundamentals, like no real ambition to ever, serve any purpose in the real world. But it's just that, we're selling sort of stories that people can bet on as part of a community. So I think that sometimes can give people a bad rap and, lead to many people to underestimate the crypto ecosystem, which I think is really sad. So I would say that's definitely one pet peeve. I mean, just in terms of, I think a lot of people, my other pet peeve, I have to say it, I guess, in like a lot of Bitcoin related ones. I think, the economics of Bitcoin are pretty broken. I don't think it's going to be like, I don't want to say like Bitcoin is definitely like not going to survive like the end of the block subsidy. I wouldn't go as far as that, but it would be enough for me if more people admitted that Bitcoin is going through a change in security model, the biggest one that any kind of live deployed system, not just in crypto but anywhere, has ever gone through, like on the internet, and then we'd have no idea how it's going to turn out. And I think there's like very good reason to believe that it's not going to work, and we might have to make some changes. But
yeah,
I think there's absolutely like no behind the scenes, like whoever you ask, like I've been to a meeting with like a couple of core developers, and someone else asked, so who among you would have preferred Bitcoin to launch with a 0.5% permanent block subsidy? And every hand went up in the room, and there were like a lot of core developers present. But then when you actually like talk, like once you sort of out of this like private space where people trust each other and so on, then all of a sudden it becomes like an opinion non grata, right? It's like political suicide to say it. And I think we sort of maneuvered ourselves there into like a situation where you cannot really talk about topic that's really, really important. And I think it's turning into a risk. So that I would say that's also a pet peeve of mine.
I think I let me know if the link is wrong. I think I was just reading this. Is that one you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's crazy. It's from 2019, and we still haven't really put enough attention into it. I think KP has a question.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Hasu. It was very insightful. like the way how you do research and also the talk about DAO treasury. So my question is, since this is kind of the educational series of the accelerator program that we're running like this year, so it'll be like quite some students working on some very interesting ideas. I'm just wondering, since you live like the frontier, right, of crypto, like you're seeing a lot of projects, probably the most innovative one, and since like the space evolves so fast, what are some very interesting idea you think is actually starting to look interesting? Maybe like early next year, will start to get very interesting, so that students can start to consider or do more research on that can potentially work on. Probably do like top 2 or 3.
Oh, that's a good question. I think right now the DeFi space has gone out of popularity. Like prices have sort of been almost unmoved for like 6 months or something. But I still think that, you know, financial applications are the most interesting one that you can build on a blockchain. It's sort of, it's the most natural first use case. I think that's going to become really, really big. Just anything that uses crypto as collateral, stable coins, you know, lending, borrowing, different kind of derivatives and structured financial products and so on. So I think even though that space is not popular right now, I think it has still a big opportunity right now there for founders who want to try something new. And, you know, what I would tie this to is, you know, the launch of different, you know, layer 2 systems like rollups, but also sort of higher throughput chains like Solana. So a lot of things have not been possible before because the architecture of the blockchain has forced us into, you know, making very big trade-offs in terms of, you know, what our applications can do. So the AMM is not good, right? AMM is not a good concept. It's only sort of the product of being in a very constrained, like very low throughput environment where market makers just cannot really update their orders, right? And that's why you're better off outsourcing it to a very dumb kind of pricing formula. But this model will always underperform once we get to like a higher throughput environment, right? Like a layer 2 blockchain or something like Solana. And I think that's why it's time for sort of builders in blockchain to, you know, put their eyes on systems that work very well in traditional finance, but that so far hadn't been able to gain any kind of product market fit, or where the kind of quote unquote dumber, like more constrained solutions like AMMs, or something like also like a compound Aave like based lending pool, where those products that only work because we are in a very low throughput environment have won, and how they can do better.
All right, perfect. I think we're coming close to time. Do anyone have any other questions? Oh, here. Kind of valuation problem I got is, how do you value companies in relationship to their market cap? It's a little bit.
To their market. Wait. What?
How do you value companies in terms of, you know, what's a good market cap? Do you look for? Do you use that terminology?
I mean, is it in crypto or in traditional finance?
In crypto, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't really have to do that, fortunately. You know, sometimes I sort of invest in, you know, very early stage ventures, but then the valuation is not really a big concern.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I only do deals that other people have sort of audited. Sometimes I pass if something looks way too expensive. So I think maybe one thing that I can say is it's not worth paying a lot of money for the tech. Almost always. The tech in crypto, when investing, is almost always very much overrated. The way, you know, that the winner is decided in any kind of crypto market or like competition is always going to be sort of the business development. So right now we see this play out. Like tech is not going to decide who is going to be the winner in the roll-up game. No, it's going to be like who's the best at business development. In the bridges, like which is going to be the winning bridge. No, it's not like, it doesn't really matter like who makes the best bridge. You just need to make a good enough bridge and then, you know, win at business development. And it doesn't matter like that you make a chain that's better than Ethereum in some metric. No, like you can gain some market share if you're very good at business development, but if you're not, then your tech just doesn't matter, right? So we saw like Nia arguably had some good tech, but very bad business development, had no chance. And then other chains, you know, like Polygon, BSC, their tech is basically just a clone of Ethereum, and in many ways it's worse, but they had very good business development, so they can gain a lot of market share very quickly. So I think it's more important that, you know, give the users what they want. The tech does not really matter. I think sometimes, you know, good enough is actually good enough.
Right, perfect. I'm gonna end the recording now.